Good afternoon. Today, Monday, June the 1st. As of today, there are no more businesses closed in the state of Mississippi. The damage done by this pandemic to the workers of our state has been devastating, and the cost of extended shutdowns too great to bear. But on this day of reopening our economy, I want to make sure that everyone hears me loud and clear. The threat of COVID-19 is as great as ever, if not greater. I know that the cable channels are moving on. I know that we see crowds of tens of thousands gathered in cities across the country. I even know that our actions to allow people to get back to work can be misinterpreted. So let me be incredibly clear. Coronavirus is deadly, it is contagious, and it is present all over our state. We need you to be smart. We need you to stay sharp. And please do not let your guard down. We have worked closely with Dr. Dobbs and his team on guidelines that will allow businesses to return to operations safely. We've even gone out of our way to help people to have pieces of their typical lives back. But we are not back to normal. If you care about protecting the lives of your loved ones, we must stay strong. We must stay vigilant. There are guidelines for safe practices. Please use them. There are rules on social gatherings. Please follow them. Please, I urge you, do not put me in a position where I have to do things that I do not want to do. I want there to be guidelines rather than orders. I don't want any of this to be happening. We're trying to help you. Please try to help yourselves. Please do not give up. Please do not forget that the coronavirus is still in our communities. Because it is the overwhelming focus of our country right now, I also want to address the killing of George Floyd and the protests and the riots that have followed across this country. I have always been careful to avoid prejudging any investigation. The officers involved in the death of George Floyd will have their day in court. But, like virtually everyone else who has looked at the case, I came away disgusted and dismayed. I pray that justice will be done. Even though we know it will not bring Mr. Floyd back to his family. It was a tragedy, and people across the country have a right to be angry. They have a right to be angry, not just for this case, but for others as well. You have a right to protest. It is among the most sacred rights in our country. Your right to protest your government. It is what makes us who we are. I applaud anyone who uses that right, and I will always defend your ability to do so. In the state of Mississippi, that is exactly what happened over the weekend. And with very few exceptions, it has been done without violence and without defacement. Protesters were outside my home this weekend, and I heard their message. I watched as they assembled in a manner that was forceful without descending into violence. Our country has been uniquely united in condemning the killing of George Floyd. And there has been real opportunity for meaningful conversation around issues that too often divide us. The violent scenes in our major cities, unfortunately and tragically, are drowning that out. I pray this is true, but I do not believe that there will be riots here. I know that the people of Mississippi do not want to burn down our own communities. Those people protesting want a voice, not violence. We will never suppress speech and protest in Mississippi as long as I'm governor. We will make an honest effort to listen. These days, it seems like we're always talking at each other or talking past each other rather than talking with each other, aiming for an audience rather than a conversation. I do not want to contribute to that problem. I also want to be clear. No one has a First Amendment right to burn or to loot. I truly believe that Mississippi protesters want no common cause with those who use them as cover for chaos. They want no violence. I want no violence. We are not eager for that possibility, but we are prepared. I want to draw a bright line between two topics. Right here, let me be clear. I am not speaking to the protesters from Mississippi. I am only speaking to the anarchists and the agitators from other parts of the country that seem committed to violence. We've seen them all over the country the last few days, and frankly, they are usually spoiled kids who are privileged enough to not know consequences, and they tend to co-opt otherwise protests that are nonviolent. I want you to hear that there is no place for the anarchist and there is no place for the antagonist here in Mississippi. Any efforts to do so will be overwhelmed. I am not threatening. I am promising that the full force of our state will be ready and willing to defend our communities. They will never stand back. They will lean in, and you will not like the results. This isn't a game. This is our state. We will protect those who are protesting to make it better, and we will swiftly, forcefully deal with those who only want disorder and violence. Again, let me be clear. Those two are two different groups. One we should honor, and one we must prosecute. Lastly, to those who are planning future protests, I do not want to tell you how to peacefully express your anger. I simply want to ask you to remember that we are still facing a deadly pandemic. Please just consider that as you organize. I know that you care deeply about protecting the lives of your fellow demonstrators, and I hope that you will not forget the risk of the coronavirus in doing so. From what I've seen, many of you are already doing that, but I just want to make sure that I encourage you to keep up, wear masks, stay socially distanced, be smart, take care of yourselves and your fellow protesters. I'll just restate what I began with today. COVID-19 is still here. The coronavirus is still in every Mississippi community. It is still contagious. It is still deadly. And as contagious and deadly as ever before, and I trust you, I urge you to continue to take it as serious in the month of June as we took it in the month of April and in the month of May. Thank you for the steps that you are taking. God bless you. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dobbs.
Thank you, Governor. So today we're reporting an additional 251 cases, brings our total to 15,752 with 5 additional deaths and a total death count of 739. We continue to see significant coronavirus activity. Much of it is being generated by community spread, people giving it to one another in the community, not necessarily associated with outbreaks or long-term care settings. It's very important for us to keep this in mind. We've made a lot of sacrifices over the previous months, and we don't want to let that turn back by being unwise as we go into this new era and over the summer. Although there have been efforts to allow the economy to be more activated, there are still very prudent measures in place that not only allow businesses to operate, but also to protect not only employees, but also the patrons. The restaurants still have restrictions such that the servers need to wear masks if they're taking care of the patrons. That's for every restaurant. 6 feet separation between tables and 50% or less capacity to make sure people can social distance. These are things that are still going to be active. If we look at social gatherings, although they've been loosened up such that a maximum of 20 people can meet indoors if you can't social distance, or 50 if you can't, and outdoors 50 if you can't social distance and 100 if you can, these are still prudent measures that people need to follow. This doesn't mean that you should do it with frequency and not be careful regardless. Right now we're working up a card game where a group of people got together just playing cards, and they almost all caught it from one person with coronavirus. Even small groups can be dangerous, so be cautious, and especially if you have any symptoms of a coronavirus, even a mild cold, and you think it's nothing, or even allergies, please get tested and don't go to a social gathering where you could infect your friends or your family. So please be cautious. If we look at other trends, we are seeing some increased strain on our healthcare system. Over the weekend, we had the most ventilated patients with coronavirus that we've had this whole time. We're down to 97 now, but over the weekend, we had 108 people who had coronavirus who had respiratory failure on the respirators. So it's still there. It's still active. We have to be very cautious and prudent, not only to prevent transmission, but especially from a regional perspective, we are putting strain on the healthcare system in certain areas. And to that end, we have noticed some areas that have some increased activity. Specifically, if we look at the counties that have had the most cases over the previous week, leading the pack is Jones County. Jones County had 86 cases between May 25th and 31, outpacing Hinds County, a county with a much larger number of people. And this isn't a nursing home outbreak or one specific thing. It is not related to poultry. It's community transmission for people who just live and work in Jones County, in Ellisville, and in Laurel. So there is significant community transmission. After Jones is Hinds, and then Neshoba, Wayne at 57. Again, we talked about Wayne last week, and certainly appreciate the great work they're doing to try to protect their community. The last thing I would like to just talk about is the nursing home testing initiative. You know, we did launch an effort to test every single nursing home patient and every resident and every nursing home employee, and we completed that last week. Very proud of the team. 100% of the centers have been tested, 211 nursing homes completed on time, and then the Department of Health and National Guard mission within that time period tested 26,617 people, really showing the capacity of what we can get done when we put our minds to it. So really proud of our teams that did that. Just shows what Mississippians can do. Thank you, Governor. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Dobbs. And I also want to thank the Herculean effort by the Department of Health, by our Mississippi National Guard. They stepped up. We asked them to test 211 facilities in 14 days. And we asked them to test almost 27,000 people. Again, this is in addition to all of the other testing that's going on in our state. They stepped up. They showed the world what Mississippi could do. I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud that they were able to get that accomplished. And we're going to continue to work to make sure that we test as many people in Mississippi as possible. What we have been talking about for the last month on testing, unlike what we were talking about in March when we said you need to have serious symptoms before you get tested, because our capacity is built up. If you are in doubt, if you think you may have it, please get a test. If you get a test and test positive, we then can Contact trace. We can determine who you've been in contact with. We can slow the spread of the virus in your community. If you don't ever get tested, we may not ever know. And so we want to make sure that if you are in doubt, that you have the ability to get tested. Today is Monday, June 1, as I mentioned earlier. Everyone knows that. That means it is technically the start of hurricane season. I do believe that Director Michelle is going to talk about the fact that we are less than 12 hours in, and we're already on our third named storm of this season. We have said that this could be a particularly bad one. Given how 2020 has gone to date, I would expect it to be a particularly bad one. And so, Director Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Governor. Yes, just to echo what the Governor said, today is June the 1st, the official start of hurricane season for 2020, and we are already really 2 weeks into an active season with two storms, Arthur and Bertha, already having happened this year. Just to remind everybody to talk about the system that we're currently watching. There is a system that's developing in the southernmost part of the Gulf of Mexico, in the Bay of Campeche. That system has about an 80% probability of developing over the course of the rest of this week. It is currently projected to move, if it does form, on a slightly northeasterly pattern. With that current projected state, the coastline of Texas and Louisiana could be affected. But as always, when those storms hit the warm water of the Gulf of Mexico, they could certainly travel east. So we'll be watching that storm very closely throughout the rest of this week and the weekend. But this is a stark reminder, and the staff and I were looking through in the communications department of news articles from Hurricane Katrina, just to remind ourselves just how quickly a bad storm can approach you and affect you. So remind everyone to watch that storm, be available, be prepared. Again, as we've talked about before, make sure that you have double checking your emergency kits as well as your evacuation routes. Hurricane planning guides are being distributed now. Of course, in our English translation we have, as we talked several weeks ago, we're in the process of wrapping up a translation in Spanish, and we're also working on one in Vietnamese for our contingent down on the coastal counties. It'll be the first time that we've done this, but in our elevated effort of preparation this year, we want to make sure that those versions are out for everyone. So we continue to be vigilant as we watch the storms that are working. Real quick on PPE update, we continue to push PPE out to the field. Today, we are pushing PPE to the northern district's Tier 1 facilities, and then tomorrow we will resume deliveries out to the 82 counties and the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. I am pleased to report that the Patel system is finally starting to get a little bit of activity. We currently have 112 facilities that are registered to use that site, and we've got just about approximately 100 masks that are worked through the system. So still a long way to go. We've got a lot of masks out there, so I want to continue to encourage facilities to please use that system and prolong the life of our N95 medical grade mask. Governor, that concludes my update for today, sir.
Thank you, Director Michelle, and appreciate you and your team and all that you're doing in these challenging times. With that, I will turn it over to questions. Courtney Ann?
Governor, you mentioned, especially for these protests, they've been peaceful up to this point, but reminding folks that if they were to come into Mississippi and have plans for violence, that you all were prepared. Can you talk about what kind of conversations, at least, I mean, obviously nothing confidential, but what kind of conversations were had this weekend with public safety or whoever was part of those conversations, knowing that it is happening across the country, that we are seeing violent protests?
Yes, so we had an opportunity late yesterday evening to sit down and have an open, honest conversation with Republican governors around the country. And it became very clear to me that in many of these situations in larger cities around the country, that there were literally thousands and thousands of protesters that are legitimately upset, they're legitimately angry, and they're peacefully protesting. And what we have seen is, and this was an overwhelming belief amongst the governors who have gone through it over the last 3 or 4 nights, that those who are acting to incite violence are not the ones that are protesting the horrible death, but they are anarchists, they're antagonists, and in many instances they're from out of state. And they're coming into these states, and because of the large numbers of individuals that are protesting, anytime violence is begun, it's almost like a powder keg, and it's bad on all sides. And so one of the things that we want to make clear is that these out-of-state agitators, these anarchists, these individuals who hate the government, they have no place here. What we have a place for here is legitimate protest for people who are upset, people who are doing it in a nonviolent way. That is a fundamental right that everyone has. You have a right to protest. You do not have a right to riot. You do not have a right to burn things down. You do not have a right to throw rocks through windows. And the vast majority of Mississippians, and I would say all Mississippians, understand that. We don't want to tear down our communities. Between the challenges that we have in this state right now, between the coronavirus and COVID-19 and all the other challenges that we've dealt with, whether it's flooding or hurricanes, we got enough individuals that are helping tear down our communities. We don't want that to happen now in our state, and I don't think that the protesters that I've seen, and we've probably had dozens of protests around Mississippi this weekend, but without, or at least with very rare exception, these are people that were expressing the fact that they were angry, that they're upset, but they did so in a respectful way. They were forceful, but they weren't violent. And that's what we expect in our state, and I believe that Mississippians will step up and continue to do exactly that as we progress in the days ahead.
Governor Reeves.
Yes, ma'am.
Jewel Hillary with Channel 16. 2 questions for you. So, as it relates to the protesters, what would you say to individuals who had criticized you for perhaps not speaking out sooner than today?
Well, what we have tried to do is focus on everything that we can possibly do to ensure that justice is served in this case and any other case that exists out there. I don't know when the right time is to speak out. Again, as I said earlier, I try to be very careful to prejudge any investigation. I believe that everyone deserves their day in court. I look at a situation like this, and certainly George Floyd deserved his day in court. And the fact that he's not getting it is awful, and it makes me angry. And I think that it makes a lot of people angry, but I don't even begin to say that the anger that I have is anywhere near what many people in our community feel, because I've never been in that position. But the fact is, we have to come together as a people. We have to stand up and say, we as Mississippians are going to do better. We're going to work together. We're going to be willing to listen. We're going to quit talking at each other and start talking to each other. And while I can't say anything about what happened a week ago or a month ago or a year ago, what I can say is that we want to work with all Mississippians to provide opportunities in the future.
Another question as it relates to coronavirus. You mentioned that you don't want to be put in a position to have to do something you don't want to do. Can you go into a little more detail?
I have absolutely no desire to forcefully shut down any parts of our economy, forcefully shut down any parts of our state. But remember, when we started this, when we received our first case in Mississippi on March the 11th, we said from day one that our goal is to ensure that every single Mississippian that can get better from the coronavirus with good quality health care receives that health care. We've accomplished that to date. But if we continue to see rises in cases caused by individuals who choose not to play by the rules, then it's going to put us in a position where we have to reevaluate the decisions that we've made. We do not want our healthcare system to become overwhelmed. We want to be able to treat every single Mississippian that gets this virus that needs to go to the hospital. We are committed to doing that. We want to be able to protect both the lives of our fellow Mississippians while at the same time protecting the livelihoods. I'm concerned that so many in our state, many of them frustrated from having been unable to get out and about, are not adhering to the guidelines that are in place. Our restaurants are open, but you can't have them at 100 25% capacity. You can't even have them at 75% capacity and do it in a safe way. It's the reason we have guidelines which say you have to do it at 50% capacity. Well, if you open your restaurant and you have twice as many people in there as you would have in a normal day, that is not adhering to the guidelines. That is not only putting individuals at risk, it's also putting us in a position where maybe we have to reevaluate those guidelines. I do not want to do that. I have no desire to have that conversation. I don't want to look in that camera and say, I'm sorry, but because we weren't responsible, we got to reevaluate our ability to open things up.
Doctor, you recently praised a business for saying you cannot come into this establishment without wearing a mask. You said that should be the steps that other businesses should take. Should that be mandated, do you believe?
Well, certainly in areas where there has been excessive transmission, that's been something that we've discussed and the governor has agreed with, and we've made that a policy. In some areas, we certainly do encourage it universally, right? But in some places, it's going to be more necessary than others. But absolutely, for employees, for patrons of businesses, encourage folks to wear masks at all times, especially if you can't maintain proper social distancing at all times.
Let me just add also, we didn't take on the task of delivering 2.25 million masks to all 82 counties just for the fun of it. We didn't acquire those masks, these community masks, and we didn't distribute them just because we had a lot of National Guard folks and emergency management folks that didn't have anything to do that day. We did it because we believed it's the right thing to do. We want to have every single person in our communities throughout the state, some of whom may not have the means, may not have the opportunity to purchase masks, so that they could get those masks, because it is important. We're encouraging people to do it. We're asking you to act responsibly. We believe that the vast majority of Mississippians are, in fact, acting responsibly. But when you look at the overall numbers in our state, which, as I said, for most of last week, for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, total number of new cases on a 7-day average had been between 200 and 300. Well, that's ticked up a little bit. And when you're talking about numbers that are still relatively low, an increase of 40 or 50 or 100 a day, that's only 1 or 2 a county, can have a huge impact, which ultimately drives down to hospital use, hospital utilization, which can then put us in a really, really harmful scenario. And that's what we're trying to avoid. That's the reason we're encouraging people to wear masks. And that's the reason we're encouraging people to realize that we can loosen restrictions. We can give individuals the opportunity to do good, to make good decisions, while still having a sense of normalcy.
What would you say to the people that are protesting in terms of continuing to stay safe in the midst of this pandemic?
If you need a mask, we'll give you a mask. Yeah, we've got plenty. It's such an easy thing to do to protect folks, because without a doubt there'll be people who get infected from this, and there'll be people who'll die somewhere in the country, or maybe in a lot of areas. So just think about the safety of your comrades in the protests, and please, everybody, wear a mask. And if you need one, I'll give them to you myself if you want to.
Cases to rise because of people protesting?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, not necessarily Mississippi. I don't know that we have the numbers, but certainly if you see the protests and it's the same thing we've seen in other areas where we've seen social gatherings and we've had large groups of people. It's just going to happen. So it's hard to imagine that it's not going to cause a bump in cases.
Around the country.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Dave Elliott with WOLX has a question.
Thank you, Renee. Governor, Mississippi casinos have been open with very strict guidelines in place, as you know. From what I've been able to ascertain, talking to gaming executives, about 80% of the pre-shutdown workforce has been brought back. While the individual properties are going to make decisions regarding that, and the Gaming Commission will decide different phases in expanding the reopening, what role will your office play in deciding when and how far to go on allowing a broader opening in the industry?
Well, thank you, Dave, for that question. It's interesting because you're right. Approximately 80% of the workforce has come back. but you look at the total amount of revenues generated, certainly over Memorial Day weekend, and they were significantly up year over year, which obviously that was the first weekend that they were open. They were not open in other parts of the country, so that helped. I heard you say the other day, and I confirmed it over the weekend, that occupation rates at our hotels and motels on the Mississippi Gulf Coast were in excess of 80% last weekend. All of that is good as long as the individuals that are involved are practicing social distancing, that they're staying 6 feet apart, if they're on the beach, that they're not gathering up with 30 other families, but they're just gathering up with those people that they personally live with and are in close contact with, and that there's plenty of open air. In terms of what role my office will play, we have been in concert with the Gaming Commission since the very beginning of this. The Gaming Commission actually made the decision to close the casinos. They issued the order which opened the casinos. Had they not done it, we would have done it. I kind of see us working in concert, working together. Again, like so many other things, I don't really care who gets the credit as long as we make the best public health decisions and economic decisions for the people of our state.
Tyler Cleveland with the Madison County Journal has a question. Tyler?
Governor, I appreciate you being here this afternoon. Quick question for Dr. Dobbs. You mentioned Neshoba County in your remarks earlier, and we've seen the cases continue to go up there, as you know. Is there any particular thing that you can point out as to why we're seeing more cases there? And as a follow-up, what are our chances of holding the Neshoba County Fair this year?
There's, Neshoba is similar to a lot of areas where there's a good bit of community transmission going on right now. There are some contributions from long-term care, but a lot of it's just happening in the community. And Neshoba has been kind of on the top for a while, so more needs to happen. Certainly, we've been in conversations with those guys and people who are leaders in those areas. So this just the standard stuff. I mean, social distancing, masks, mass gatherings. Local leadership's really important to help people sort of follow those. As far as the Neshoba County Fair, we will be having conversations with the organizers. It's going to be late in the summer, and we'll just talk and see. But what I will say is, if people will behave now, we can do stuff later, right? If we behave in such a way that the disease fizzles out in your community, then the stuff that you want to do, you can do. It drives me crazy because it's the little stuff. There's no reason not to wear a mask when you're doing something. There's no reason to go to a big party when it's not that important. And I don't want us to lose ground, so please be prudent in our activities.
A very wise man once said to me, any individual that counts his pennies never really has to worry about his dollars. And I think we're in a position now in our state in which if we will do the little things to slow the spread in these communities, it will allow us to do the bigger things later in the summer and into the fall. Again, we have a society in which businesses are open. Our economy is open. They need to continue to be open. But that doesn't mean we have to pretend like it's June of 2019 and that the virus, which is highly contagious, does not exist. This is not June of 2019. This is June 2020, and 2020 has been a year dating back to January the 1st in which there's been a lot of challenges in our state, and we've had to deal with them, and we'll continue to deal with them, but we've got to work together. We've got to work together to make a difference. Cornelia.
Governor, for both you and Dr. Dobbs, I can hear and even feel sitting here each day the increasing frustration about this idea of the personal responsibility, it seems, and wearing the mask and going to the stores, not overcrowding. Can you talk about where that's coming from, if it's from looking at the numbers each day or if it's anecdotally as you all are passing stores and seeing the crowds? Just kind of talk through where this frustration continues to come from.
Well, what I would tell you is in the last 14 days, which is basically Friday to Friday, we did 27,000 tests, roughly, in long-term care facilities. We did it because a large number of deaths are originating in those long-term care facilities. That's not a surprise to anyone who watches our press conference. We've been talking about this for months on end. But it is, we want to make sure that we are finding cases there as early as possible so we can protect the health of all of the residents as well as all of the individual employees. And what we found is, I do think that the fact that the overall increase in the number of cases is driven a little bit by the number of tests that we're doing, and particularly that we've done 27,000 of those long-term care facilities. But when the final results come out, what we're going to find is we didn't find that many new cases in the long-term care facilities. We're seeing a lot of new cases in community transmission, and we just feel like if there are those individuals in these communities that would do little things like wear masks, that wouldn't have big block parties, which, I mean, look, nobody likes to do that significantly more than a lot of us, but it's just not the time to do significant block parties with hundreds of people. Get together with your family, a group of 6 or 8 or 10 or maybe 12 or 14 if you're outside, but let's just be smart. Let's just be smart, because if we will be smart, if we will take personal actions, then we won't have to deal with government mandates in the long term.
There's multiple streams of information, I think, that we're seeing. I mean, one of them obviously is ongoing case counts, which are pretty significant and growing. Although we are testing more, it's not that. It's really, there's cases out there. It's happening. We're seeing in some areas a shift to younger people getting it. In Jones County, the biggest groups are going to be between 20 and 40. So that's people who are out and about doing stuff. We're seeing outbreaks related to people who are getting together in gatherings that do not meet the guidance that is in the current executive order. So it's really, all streams are showing the same thing. And then if you look, on social media and stuff and see people getting together and across the country, this is not a unique phenomenon for Mississippi. But the thing that I really want to express is it's not about you and your rights. It's about what you're doing to somebody else. And even if you're young, you may get sick and you may die, because that does happen. But you may give it to your mom, or you may give it to somebody else who then goes and visits their mom in the nursing home, and then they die. And a lot of these infections are happening for people who don't know they're contagious. You could be asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, or just have mild symptoms. And it's just the biology of the scenario. It's not about my personal choice. It's about what I'm doing to other people when I'm around them, and that's why it's so important.
Renee?
Joy Barnes with WCBI has a question.
Yes, ma'am. This question is for you. Curious if you have been made aware of Attorney General Lynn Fitch's office, their decision not to prosecute a former Columbus police officer on a manslaughter charge from October 2015. The shooting occurred in the line of duty where a gentleman was killed. And just to see if you had any comment on that decision by her office.
Well, thanks for the question, Joey. And I'm not familiar with exactly what you were talking about. I will look into it and maybe hopefully be able to answer your question next time we get together. Sorry.
Patrick McGee with Sun Herald has a question. Sorry, it's not unmuted. Come back to you, Patrick.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Dr. Dobbs, I know there was talk back in the spring about there being some hope that the spread of the virus would slow down in the summer. How much confidence do you have in that right now?
It's not slowing it down so far. And in hot places like Brazil, they're having massive outbreaks. So, there are some theoretical reasons why it might slow it somewhat, but it may not be enough of an impediment to slow it down enough to overcome the transmission dynamics we're seeing in people in crowds and that sort of thing. So would not anticipate a significant help from the summer weather, but would anticipate a significant worsening in the fall and the winter as it gets a little bit cooler.
Tim Reeves with the Vicksburg Post has a question.
Thanks so much. Dr. Dobbs, two questions. One is last week, I think I asked you about being able to, at some point, update active cases involving nursing homes or long-term care facilities. I was just checking to see the status of that. And then secondly, Claiborne County in our area has seen their cases nearly double in less than a week. Is that one of the areas in which your office is now investigating, worried about, so forth?
Claiborne County was almost entirely one outbreak. And so it's not really so much a community situation as it is a singular outbreak, although we are working on that very closely. And on the long-term care, was that the recovered people? Is that the question? Was that the
Yeah, that was determining how many active cases remain that presume recovered, so forth.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we don't have that done. I'll get with my team and see if we can't get that done. Thank you.
David WLOX has another question.
Yes, Governor, you pointed out that the protests in Mississippi have been peaceful, that from the one you referenced outside the governor's mansion to Petal, where the mayor is under fire. We had two in Biloxi this weekend. They were peaceful. There's one scheduled this Saturday in Gulfport. Some indications it could be large, might attract people from outside the community. What kind of intel, if any, is the state doing to monitor these kind of events?
Well, thank you, Dave. And in addition to those that you mentioned, we also had smaller with a manageable size in Tupelo as well as in Oxford over the weekend, both relatively peaceful, which we appreciate. What I would tell you is we are monitoring intel 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have a scenario in which this is true, whether these protests are ongoing or not. We monitor, obviously, in a lawful way, social media and other areas to make sure. And in the event that it becomes a higher risk that the crowds are going to be larger and that the local law enforcement teams need reinforcements, we stand ready to help in any regard that is asked and is necessary.
Colonel, it just came out that the disturbance has been increased to 90%. Kind of walk through how you all are preparing for any particular storm that may come this way. Are you mobilizing people? Just kind of fill us out.
Yeah, well, the main thing that we're doing is keeping an eye on it, first of all. The biggest thing, and we've talked about that a number of times here, are the shelters. Very confident in the capacity of the ability for those coastal counties to respond on their response mode. The shelters are a little bit concerning. I'm actually going tomorrow to meet with Forest County, Harrison County, Hancock County, and Jackson County to talk about them. I have the gaps that they have in their shelters. We've identified resources to do that. But as far as the response, the biggest issue is of course the type of storm and what it's going to be and the number of resources. But to answer your question, yes, I do believe that we are prepared. This is not something that we're not unfamiliar with. The biggest thing that calls for a heightened state of alert is the violence in which this season is supposed to be. But I'm confident in our level of preparedness, and the shelters are something that we certainly have resources to throw into that.
And I would just add that what is the current thoughts as to when this tropical storm or whatever it turns into may hit landfall? Is it late in the week?
Late in the week, late weekend, potentially if it moves slow, early next week.
And to Dave Elliott's question from earlier, I would just say that anyone from around the country that would like to gather for a large protest in Gulfport this week, at least any time over the next 7 to 10 days, based upon what I've seen, you're probably going to get very, very wet, and so you may want to go somewhere else in another part of the country. Any other questions? Seeing none, as always, I want to thank you. Yes.
Emily from AP has a
Okay.
question.
Sorry.
Emily?
Thank you, Renee. Governor, what is your response to President Trump saying on the call to governors today that governors have been weak in their response to the protests?
Emily, thank you for the question. And as I have done for the last 2.5 months, I'm very reluctant to criticize other governors for the responses that they've made for COVID-19 or the coronavirus, and I'll stick with that in this particular scenario as well, because what I don't know is I don't know all the information that they had and when they had it and what decisions they made. The only thing I can tell you is in our state, we understand those who are protesting peacefully. We defend their right to do so. We appreciate the fact that to this point they have remained protesting and not rioting. And I will just tell you that should that posture change, we are prepared to deal with that change. I don't think that will come from Mississippians. I don't think we've seen that in a lot of other states. From what I can tell, they tend to be anarchist, antagonists coming from out of state. Because look, people here in Mississippi know that there's an awful lot of small businesses throughout every community, and the last thing we want to do, and they've struggled, they've had a hard time for the last 3 months because of, in many instances, government action. We don't want to throw bricks through windows and harm our small business owners, because they are our community. They are Mississippians, and so I'll let other governors defend themselves or whatnot. But for us, we're gonna focus on Mississippi. We're gonna do what's best for Mississippi. Thank you all, and God bless.